Hey, what's going on, guys? This is AndrewChicken and welcome back to another video. Point tanks are a vital asset to any strong team, as they're the ones responsible for holding on to the objective, pushing or defending the payload, and holding key choke points for their team. They excel at protecting themselves and their teammates with their massive shields and sustaining tons of damage for their team to make plays. That's why in this video I'll be going over my picks for the top 5 strongest point tanks and Paladins. Now before we get started, I want to mention that this video was influenced by you, the members of this wonderful community. I made a poll asking which point tanks you guys think are the strongest, and this poll helped me decide which champions to put on this list. The number 1 best point tank had the clearest consensus out of all our number 1 spots so far, so make sure to watch to the end to see who that tank is. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get straight into the video. Number 5. Ashe. In the number 5 spot we have everyone's favorite heavily armored war machine waifu of death, Ashe. Ashe is a flexible tank who excels at bullying enemies, earning kills, and holding objectives. Ashe's kit is designed around harassing enemies and making it very difficult for them to win a battle against her. While her DPS is among the lowest in the game at just 444 damage per second, she's got the most crowd control abilities out of any tank, tied with Atlas if Atlas uses Unstable Fissure. She has 2 forms of a knockback with her kinetic burst and shoulder bash, and she has a stun with her ultimate, Assert Dominance. With all of these knockbacks, she makes it very difficult for an enemy point tank to stay on the objective, because she can continuously just knock them away once they come near. This couples nicely with her Siege Shield, which protects Ashe from incoming damage in a very similar way to other shields like Barracks or Makoa's with Half Shell. Unlike those other tanks, however, Ashe can reliably keep the shield between herself and the enemies by knocking them back behind the shield if they try and pass through it to hit her. This is made even easier by Ashe's point tank talent Fortress Breaker, which greatly increases the shield's health and size and slows down how fast it creeps forward, making it one of the best shields in the game for protecting Ashe in a tight circumstance. Ashe's cards also give her fantastic uptime on this shield. Ramparts gives her up to 4 seconds of raw cooldown reduction on her shield, and with Siege Engine, she can get an additional 5 seconds of cooldown reduction whenever she hits an enemy with Kinetic Burst. With Siege Engine, Ashe can have nearly 100% uptime on her Siege Shield, especially with a few points of Chronos. Of course, the one downside to this card is that if a shield gets in the way of her Kinetic Burst, or there are no enemies nearby, she can't reset the cooldown on her shield. Still, this is an extremely powerful reset card, and it makes Ashe's shield one of the best in the game when coupled with Fortress Breaker. And if Ashe really needs to stay alive, she has her ultimate, Assert Dominance. This ultimate causes her to jump up into the air, and then stun and deal 600 damage to people nearby when she hits the ground. For the next 8 seconds, as long as she's standing near the flag planted in the ground, she's immortal. This ultimate is excellent for bursting enemies down, since she does a solid chunk of damage with the ultimate, and then can use her shoulder bash combo on the stunned enemies to deal a further 1200 damage. It's also great for securing an area and making loads of space for her team. The one downside to her ultimate is that she can be crowd controlled out of it by things like Makoa's Hook, Khan's ultimate, and many of the numerous knockbacks in Paladins. However, she can still use her Siege Shield to block most of these effects, and is still an overall solid ultimate. The last thing I want to talk about is Ashe's weapon. While it does have extremely low DPS, it's still a fantastic weapon for a frontline to have due to the utility it provides. It causes a large area explosion once it hits an enemy or terrain, so she can use it to hit multiple enemies or deployables at a time. This makes her excellent at fighting tanks such as Barrack or Inara, since she can damage both of those tanks as well as their deployables at the same time. Ashe can also apply Cauterize to multiple enemies at a time due to how big the explosion is, which makes her an excellent Cauterize spreader. Another thing that's nice about Ashe's massive AoE weapon is this card, which gives her 50% lifesteal. If she's constantly hitting an enemy for the full 400 damage per shot, she's healing herself for 222 healing per second, and she can hit multiple people at a time for even more healing. This is more healing output than a Genos Mark, and she can combine this with the healing she gets from her healer to stay alive exceptionally well in a battle. And when combined with Brawl at level 5, she has among the best self-sustain in the tank class. And the last great thing about Ashe's weapon is that it's arguably the best weapon in the frontline class for denying cover. Because it explodes when it hits terrain, Ashe can shoot the floor or a wall near where an enemy is hiding to still hit them behind cover. She can also hit over Khan's shield with some practice, and hit behind Fernando's shield if there's a nearby wall or ceiling. This cover denial is another powerful thing about Ashe that I really love about her weapon. Overall, Ashe is an extremely strong frontline who can hold her own in a point fight and bully the enemies into submission. Because she's just an all-around great tank, she earns the number 5 spot on this list. Number 4. Terminus. Terminus is one of the few tanks in the game who's both an amazing point tank and off tank. Terminus is a fantastic tank for protecting himself and his allies due to his power siphon, which is an indestructible, aimable shield that can block just about anything. As of the trick shot update, Terminus can hold up his power siphon for 4 seconds straight, and he can toggle it on and off as he pleases to block large bursts of damage whenever he wants. And with his numerous power siphon reset cards, Terminus can keep his siphon up almost all the time. This one in particular is extremely strong, since Terminus earns calamity charges just by absorbing damage with his power siphon. He can then fire those charges back at the enemies to reset his power siphon, and then rinse and repeat. He deals lots of damage by doing this with the talent Decimation, and with this card, he gets some pretty good sustain out of it too. Alternatively, Terminus can become extremely hard to kill by storing his power siphon charges instead of shooting them. By using Undying with these two cards, Terminus can rush around the battlefield while shrouded in some seriously powerful damage reduction that allows him to sustain way more damage than the average tank. He can also use his Shatterfall to close the distance between an enemy even further, and then slow them or stun them with the talent Crush. This stun can be great against champions like Fernando or Makoa, who have channeled shields that will be interrupted by the stun. And if Terminus ever dies, that's no problem that his ultimate can't handle. His ultimate completely resurrects him over the span of 2.5 seconds, and once he's finally at full health, he explodes in a massive area around him, dealing 2600 damage. Not only does this score the occasional kill on the hapless champion out of position, but it forces enemies to use their shields or hide behind cover, and it keeps Terminus in the fight. By having his ultimate ready, Terminus can play extremely aggressively, knowing that he'll be able to resurrect if he dies and keep going or retreat. And if he goes down during a team fight where his team still needs him, resurrecting will keep him in the fight, whereas every other tank in the game would still have to wait to respawn and then head back in on their horse. Terminus is one of the hardest tanks in the game to kill, and he can resurrect himself so that the enemy team has to do it all again. He can use his power siphon to protect himself and his teammates from potentially tens of thousands of damage, since it has an infinite health pool. This all makes him an extremely effective tank, both for point tanking and off tanking. However, he does have his drawbacks which prevent him from reaching number 1 on this point tank list. For starters, while his ultimate does have its strengths, it does have a few counters which can make it nigh useless. Androxus' reversal can send most of the damage that his ult does back at him, and Atlas can reset his health pool to 0 with just 1 rewind. Both of these can be mitigated with good timing, and resilience in the case of Atlas. However, a bigger drawback to Terminus is his melee weapon. Terminus has good damage per second, but the problem with his damage is that it's only melee. Every other tank in the game can do better damage at range than him, since his only form of ranged damage is his calamity charges. Even with Decimation, his ranged damage mostly relies on enemies shooting his power siphon, which oftentimes leaves him just staring at the enemies hoping that they don't shoot him when he can't close the distance. Despite these setbacks, Terminus is still a rock-solid tank, who can both point tank and off tank adequately. Because of this, he deserves the number 4 spot on this list. Number 3. Inara. In the number 3 spot we have a prime example of what it means to be a point tank, Inara. Inara is designed with point defense in mind, with her powerful wall, warder's field, and earthen guard that makes her really hard to kill. Anyone who steps on point with Inara will have a difficult time doing much of anything, except dying. Inara can wall off an enemy from their team, putting a physical barrier between them and their teammates. This isolation can easily get that enemy killed if Inara's teammates help her kill them, and they can become even more entrapped when her wall is used in combination with Warder's Field, which slows down and damages any enemy stuck in its radius. And with the talent Treacherous Ground, her Warder's Field even cripples the enemies inside. A wall plus Warder's Field combination can be deadly for just about anyone, as Inara can just keep them backed into a corner and whittle away at their health with her stone spear. Trying to kill Inara is just as difficult as getting out of one of her brutal traps. Inara can cycle her 3 abilities to keep herself alive and healthy on point. Earthen Guard gives her and her deployables 30% damage reduction, and it increases the healing she receives from all sources by 30%. This is a powerful ability for keeping Inara alive, and it only becomes stronger with the talent Mother's Grace, which gives her 40% damage reduction and crowd control immunity while Earthen Guard is active. Inara is the only tank besides Fernando with Formidable to have total crowd control immunity on a regular ability, which makes her pretty unique and extremely powerful. With the card Sacred Ground, Warder's Field can give Inara up to 25% damage reduction while she stands inside of it. When her Earthen Guard is down, this ability will continue to give her some nice damage reduction with this card. And of course, if anyone steps near her while it's active, they're going to be slowed and damaged. And then of course, when her Warder's Field and Earthen Guard are down, she can use her wall to block damage instead of trapping an enemy. She can hide behind her wall and dart around it as necessary, and when cycled correctly with her other abilities, her Earthen Guard will be back off cooldown by the time her wall goes down. And if she feels like she needs double the protection from her walls, she can always just use the talent Tremors to give her exactly that, double the walls. Inara's ultimate is also incredibly powerful for comboing with her teammates and getting enemies in a vulnerable position. Seismic Crash lets her throw her Stone Spear at the enemies, gaining crowd control immunity for 2 seconds while casting it. Once her spear hits terrain, it stuns all enemies within a sizable radius for 2 seconds and deals 500 damage. The initial throw also pierces shields, so she can throw it through stuff like Fernando's shield and stun enemies behind it. And when combined with other ultimates like Ceres' Convergence or Victor's Barrage, it can be an extremely effective ult. It's basically like a thrown version of Ashe's ult without the damage immunity. Inara has just one major drawback: she has no movement ability. This can make it difficult for Inara to push in or retreat, and it means that she has to be extremely deliberate with her ability usage, and also be very careful near the edge of certain maps when against champions like Ashe. Despite this setback, Inara is still a rock-solid tank, who earns the number 3 spot on this list.
No, I didn't rewind you. He really did make the same joke twice. Honestly, I don't know what's wrong with him. He really needs to write new material. Anyways, back to the video. I hope he puts me on the list.
Number 2. Barrack. In the number 2 spot we have the most agreed upon second place champion since I started my Season 4 top 5 lists, Barrack. Barrack is a phenomenal point tank, who dishes out tons of damage while also being very hard to kill. While he does have one of the lowest base health pools out of all the tanks, his abilities make up for this by giving him some wicked protection. Let's start off with his Barricade, which has more health than him at 3750 HP. This shield covers a massive area, and Barrack can dance around the shield to block damage from just about any direction, all while shooting enemies with his blunderbuss. And with Fortify, it becomes one of the tankiest shields in the game with 5750 HP, and it can be deployed more often due to Fortify's cooldown reduction. Speaking of his blunderbuss deals 500 damage per second, which is on the low end of tanks, but it can hit headshots unlike similar weapons such as Makoa's Cannon or Inara's Stone Spear. And with the talent Tinkerin, it can deal significantly more damage at range, while forfeiting the ability to headshot. However, his blunderbuss isn't just the only way he deals damage, and his shield isn't just the only way he keeps himself alive. Barrack has the ability to deploy 2 different turrets which each shoot enemies within their line of sight for 120 damage per second. They can also sustain 1000 damage before being destroyed, and they can often take shots for Barrack because Barrack's short hitbox lets him mostly hide behind his turrets. Also, on a quick side note, Barrack can also completely hide behind the payload, and use it to block damage better than any other tank can. Anyways, back on track, Barrack's turrets can also give him some fantastic self-sustain. Healing Station lets his turrets heal him for up to 125 healing per second just by standing next to them, and his turrets can also heal him for a further 100 damage per shot with this card here. However, we're still not done with the utility his turrets have to offer. Once his turrets finally get destroyed, as they always do, they can give him up to 25% cooldown reduction on all his active cooldowns with this card here. This lets him spam even more turrets to deal even more damage, block more fire, and heal Barrack for even more. And he can also spam his shield more too, which is great. And if you want even more turret mania, you can always run the Forge Fire talent, which lets him exchange his normal ultimate for the ability to deploy 2 more flamethrower turrets on top of the regular turrets he already has, for 4 turrets in total. These flamethrower turrets can block even more damage for Barrack since they have more health, and they pack quite a punch against anyone who dares come near them. If you opt to keep his regular ultimate with his other 2 talents, that's okay too, because his ultimate is quite powerful. It deploys a 10,000 health dome shield around Barrack, with a powerful flamethrower turret in the middle. This ultimate can be cycled with 2 regular shields before and after the ult to give Barrack some unrivaled protection, especially when running Fortify. Stepping inside the dome shield with a full health Barrack inside is suicide for most squishy champions, since the combined DPS from 2 regular turrets, the flamethrower turret, and Barrack's blunderbuss is a staggering 1340 DPS, which is equivalent to Victor's primary fire, and this is on a tank. Barrack deals damage in spades, and he also has some great survivability. He also has the one thing that Inara lacks: mobility. His rocket boots let him quickly dodge and weave through incoming fire and get behind cover. And with fuel efficiency in his loadout, rocket boots becomes even better, letting him chase down enemies and reposition surprisingly well. Picking Barrack has a whole bunch of upsides and almost no downsides. He's a solid tank for holding objectives and key choke points, and he can also deal some great damage while he's at it. Because of this, he absolutely deserves the number 2 spot on this list. Number 1. Fernando. And in the number 1 spot we have the best point tank in Paladins as voted by the community with the widest margin of the entire 2021 top 5 list series, Fernando. let's just get right down to business and talk about Aegis, which is the biggest reason why Fernando is so good right now. Aegis lets Fernando toggle on and off the most powerful shield on the game at will, and have it available almost constantly. You see, normally, Fernando's shield has a 12-second cooldown, which is fair considering how it can block 5,500 damage and be aimed towards whatever damage Fernando needs to block. However, Aegis completely removes this cooldown, instead opting for a resource meter which regenerates slowly while the shield is active, and more quickly when the shield isn't deployed. Basically, Fernando has the mechanics of Khan's talent Leon's shield, but on a way bigger and better shield. Fernando can block gobs of damage for himself and his teammates with his talent, and with some helpful cards like Last Stand and Heat Transfer, he can charge around much more frequently and heal up with the help of his already busted shield. Now of course, the one drawback to this shield is that you can't deal damage while the shield is active. However, there are ways to mitigate this problem. First of all, the simple fact that Fernando's shield can give his teammates some much needed cover they can shoot behind makes this okay. But in a duel with an enemy champion, Fernando can still lower his shield and shoot or cast his fireball and then immediately raise the shield again, so he can still do some damage while keeping his shield raised for a significant portion of time. This works so well in part because his weapon ignites enemies that it hits, doing residual damage over time for the next 2 seconds after getting hit. All Fernando has to do is tap an enemy once to be doing damage to them for the next 2 seconds, even if, admittedly, it's not a lot of damage. Fernando's weapon is also ridiculously easy to use, since it's a massive hit-scan flamethrower, and it's one of the best weapons in the game for applying cauterize and bulldozing deployables, since it covers such a large area and can often affect multiple enemies and deployables at the same time. And while Fernando does lack burst on his flamethrower, he does make up for that lack of burst with his fireball and charge, two incredibly simple abilities for dealing additional damage. His fireball is a massive piercing projectile that deals a burst of 450 damage, and it does even more damage with the talent Scorch. It also serves as his long-ranged poke, since his flamethrower does lack a bit on range. His charge also does a further 400 damage to anyone in its path, and it's also a simple dash forward that lets Fernando quickly chase an enemy or get behind cover. Fernando can also have 2 charges of his dash that deal 500 damage and give him crowd control immunity with the talent Formidable, which is extremely useful against teams with a lot of crowd control. Like I mentioned earlier, Fernando and Inara are unique in their ability to deny crowd control with a single ability when using their respective talents, which is just another reason why Fernando is so good. And of course, Fernando's ultimate is also extremely powerful, as it allows Fernando to save himself and his teammates from certain death. A well-timed Fernando ultimate can prevent powerful ultimates from destroying his team, including, but not limited to, King Bomb, Dragon Punch, Barrage, and so much more. It basically gives everyone around Fernando a 4-second window of opportunity to be aggressive and get kills, or retreat to safety and heal up so they can get back in the fight. It's amazing when used properly, as long as you don't use it when you're the only one alive during a fight to stagger yourself even further. Everything about Fernando's kit is simple and easy to use, and when combined with his powerful talent Aegis, he's incredibly strong as well. Because he's so easy to get so much value out of, Fernando is absolutely deserving of the #1 spot on this list.
Well, I guess I didn't make it onto the list then. That's sad. Well, I guess I'll just have to see if he puts me on the top 5 off-tanks list coming out next week then. Yeah, he has to put me on that one, right? I'm the main character after all. I'm here to fuck up Yagoroth and save the entire realm. I can literally rewind an entire enemy team back to spawn. Who else can do that? Yeah, I'm definitely making it on that list. At least, I hope. You should subscribe to find out. Anyways, I'll see you guys next
Doing an Atlas impression is hard. Well, this is awkward. You guys thought it was Atlas, didn't you? I'll just see myself out. Bye.